Rowan Dalton discovered the first mended shirt on a cold morning in early autumn, hanging on the wooden peg beside his bed where he had left it torn and bloodied the night before. He stood there in his small clothes, staring at the garment as though it might explain itself. The fabric showed no trace of the jagged rip that had split it from collar to hem, when a broken fence post had caught him during yesterday's storm. The stitching was impossibly fine, almost invisible, better than anything his clumsy fingers could manage and far superior to what any seamstress in the distant village might produce. His pulse quickened as he reached out to touch the mend, half expecting the shirt to dissolve like morning mist. The linen felt solid and real beneath his calloused fingertips, the thread work so delicate it seemed like magic. He pulled the shirt over his head and walked to the window, peering out at his modest farm. The land stretched before him in gentle rolling hills, 40 acres of wheat fields and pasture that he had worked alone for 3 years since mustering out of the border wars. A small barn stood to the east, housing his 2 cows and the aging plow horse that had served him faithfully. To the west, his vegetable garden struggled against the rocky soil. Everything looked exactly as it should in the pale dawn light. No mysterious visitors, no signs of disturbance. Just his isolated homestead at the edge of the frontier, where the cultivated lands gave way to wild forest and the territories beyond. The second mended shirt appeared 4 days later. This one had been missing a sleeve entirely, torn clean off when he had caught it on a nail while repairing the barn roof. Rowan had thrown it into the rag pile, considering it beyond salvage. Yet there it sat on his kitchen table when he came in from the evening milking, the sleeve reattached with such skill that he could barely see where the damage had been. His hands trembled slightly as he examined the work. Someone was entering his home while he slept. Someone with extraordinary ability and seemingly benign intentions, but the violation of his sanctuary left him deeply unsettled. He had seen too much during the war to take comfort in mysteries. 5 years on the front lines, fighting against orc raiders who came down from the mountains to attack human settlements, had taught him that the night held dangers most folk could scarcely imagine. He had killed orcs in battle, seen friends torn apart by their massive strength and brutal weapons. The war had ended with an uneasy truce 2 years ago, but tensions remained high. Orcs were still considered monsters by most humans, savage creatures barely capable of rational thought. Rowan had his doubts about that assessment after years of combat against enemies who showed tactical brilliance and coordinated strategy, but he kept such thoughts to himself. That night he forced himself to stay awake, sitting in the wooden chair beside his hearth with an old hunting knife across his lap. The fire burned low as the hours crawled past midnight. His eyelids grew heavy despite his determination, and he found his head nodding forward. He jerked awake repeatedly, angry at his weakness, but exhaustion from 14 hours of farm work dragged at him like chains. Just before dawn he finally surrendered to sleep, his chin dropping to his chest. He woke to find another shirt mended, this one draped across the back of the very chair where he had kept his vigil. The knife had been gently moved from his lap to the floor beside him, placed there with obvious care so it would not fall and cause injury. Rowan picked up the shirt with mounting frustration and examined it in the strengthening light. The work was flawless as always, the torn seam along the shoulder now perfectly joined. Whoever was doing this possessed not only incredible skill, but also the ability to move through his home with absolute silence. The door had remained barred from the inside all night. The windows were too small for a full-grown person to climb through. Yet someone had been here, close enough to touch him while he slept, The mystery consumed his thoughts over the following days. He considered and discarded a dozen explanations. A helpful ghost seemed absurd. A tiny person who could slip through cracks in the walls was the stuff of children's tales. Wild animals certainly could not so. That left human or orc, and no human had reason to help him so secretly. The nearest neighbor lived 5 miles away, and Rowan had barely spoken to anyone since settling here. He had chosen this isolated spot specifically to avoid people, to find some peace after the endless noise and blood of warfare. If the intruder was an orc, the situation became far more complicated and potentially dangerous. Orcs were forbidden from entering human territories under the terms of the peace treaty. Any orc found on this side of the border could be killed on sight without legal consequence. The law assumed that orcs who crossed over did so with hostile intent, planning raids or violence. But what kind of hostile orc broke into a home to perform expert mending? The contradiction made no sense, yet Rowan could think of no other explanation that fit the facts. He began leaving small tests, trying to learn more about his mysterious visitor. He placed a shirt that needed mending on the kitchen table along with a small piece of bread and cheese, an offering of sorts. In the morning, the shirt was repaired and the food was gone. He left a scrap of paper and a piece of charcoal, hoping for some written message. The paper remained blank, but another damaged shirt had been mended. He scattered flour on the floor near the door, hoping to capture footprints. In the morning, the flour had been carefully swept into a neat pile in the corner, and 2 more shirts hung on pegs, their rips and tears erased by those impossibly skilled hands. Autumn deepened into its golden heart. The wheat harvest came, and Rowan worked from dawn until long after dusk, cutting and bundling the grain by hand. The labor was brutal for one man alone, and each night he collapsed into bed with muscles screaming and hands blistered raw. Each morning he woke to find his work shirts mended, cleaner than they had been, sometimes with reinforced patches added to areas that were wearing thin. Once he found his spare trousers repaired, the torn knee expertly darned. Another time, his heavy winter coat appeared with new buttons sewn on to replace the ones he had lost. The gifts expanded beyond mending. He came home one evening to find his kitchen swept cleaner than he had managed in months, with fresh wildflowers in a clay cup on the table. Another night, someone had reorganized his pantry, arranging the preserved vegetables and dried goods with tidy efficiency. His firewood, which he had left in a haphazard pile outside, was stacked properly against the house where it would stay dry through the coming winter. A loose board on the porch stairs was hammered back into place. A crack in the henhouse wall was stuffed with fresh moss and mud to keep out drafts. Rowan found himself looking forward to discovering each new act of kindness, and the fear he had initially felt gradually transformed into curiosity, and something warmer he was reluctant to name. Whoever was helping him did so with such gentle consideration that he could not maintain his suspicion. He began leaving out better food, not just scraps but portions of his own meals, fresh bread, apples from his small orchard, once half a roasted chicken with herbs. The food always vanished by morning and the gifts of labor continued. He started talking aloud in his empty house, feeling foolish but compelled to try. "Thank you," he said to the silent room one evening as he examined a shirt that had been mended so perfectly he could no longer find where the damage had been. "I do not know who you are, but I am grateful for your kindness. You do not have to hide. I mean you no harm." The words hung in the air, met only by the crackling of the fire. But that night someone left a small carved wooden bird on his pillow, a tiny thing no bigger than his thumb, shaped with careful attention and smooth to a silky finish. Rowan held it in his palm and felt something shift in his chest, a tightness that was not entirely unpleasant. This was not just repayment for food or shelter. This was a gift of creation, something made specifically for him. Someone was thinking about him, caring about him in a way he had not experienced since before the war. The first snow came in early November, arriving with a bitter wind that rattled the shutters and piled white drifts against the barn. Rowan worked desperately to secure his animals and supplies, knowing that winter on the frontier could kill the unprepared. He spent a full day reinforcing the barn, patching every gap and crack to keep the cold out. When he finally stumbled back to the house near midnight, exhausted and half frozen, he found the hearth fire built up high and his blankets warmed by stones that had been heated and wrapped in cloth. A pot of stew sat beside the fire, still steaming, made from vegetables from his own stores but prepared with a skill that far exceeded his crude cooking. Tears pricked at his eyes as he ate, overwhelmed by the care that some unknown person showed him night after night. He made a decision that evening as he sat beside the fire, feeling the warmth seep back into his bones. "I am going to stay awake tonight," he announced to the empty room. "I am going to see you, whoever you are. I need to thank you properly. I need to know who has been so kind to me." He paused, then added more softly, "Please do not be afraid of me. I owe you too much to ever hurt you." He positioned himself in the chair again, but this time he made sure to rest during the afternoon so that exhaustion would not defeat him. He kept the fire burning bright enough to see by, but not so high that it would flood the room with light. He controlled his breathing and kept his body relaxed, hoping he would seem less threatening. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Midnight came and went. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows. Rowan's eyes ached from staring at the door, but he refused to look away. Around 2 hours past midnight he heard it. The softest sound, like a whisper of movement outside the door. Not the scratching of the latch, but something else. A faint scraping from above. Rowan kept perfectly still, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound came again from the ceiling, from the area above the main room where the roof timbers met the walls. There was a small gap there, he knew, where the chimney passed through. A gap he had always meant to patch properly, but had never quite gotten around to fixing. A shadow appeared at the edge of the firelight. Something was coming down from that gap, moving with incredible care and silence. Rowan caught his breath as the figure emerged fully into view, climbing down the interior wall with the agility of a spider. When her feet touched the floor and she turned toward the room, he saw her clearly for the first time. She was an orc, and she was beautiful. Her skin was a deep green, the color of forest moss, and it seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. She stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, with a strong, athletic build that spoke of physical capability and grace. Her face was striking, with high cheekbones and large, expressive eyes that were a warm amber color. 2 small tusks protruded from her lower lip, white against her green skin, giving her an exotic appearance that was far from the monstrous image humans usually painted of orcs. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical braid that fell to her waist. She wore simple clothing, a tunic and trousers made from hide and rough cloth, patched and worn but scrupulously clean. In her hands, she carried a small bundle, which Rowan guessed contained sewing supplies and probably the food he had left out. They stared at each other across the room for a long moment, both frozen in surprise and uncertainty. Rowan could see the fear in her eyes, the way her body tensed as though preparing to flee or fight. Her gaze darted to the door, calculating distances, and he realized she thought he might try to stop her from escaping. He very slowly raised his empty hands, showing he held no weapon, and forced himself to smile despite the pounding of his pulse. "Please do not go," he said quietly, keeping his voice as gentle as he could manage. "I just want to talk. I want to thank you." The orc girl took a half step back, her eyes wide. She looked young, probably around his own age of 24, though he knew orcs aged differently than humans and he could not be certain. Her breathing came quick and shallow, and he could see the fear warring with something else in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe longing. When she spoke, her voice was soft and musical, with only a slight accent that gave her words an exotic lilt. "You should not thank me," she said. "I am trespassing. I am breaking the law by being here. You should be calling for the militia, not offering me kind words." "The militia is 5 miles away, and I am not inclined to call them," Rowan replied. He stayed seated, hoping that keeping his position non-threatening would encourage her to remain. "You have done nothing but help me for weeks. You have mended my clothes, cleaned my home, left me gifts. Why would I repay that kindness with violence? Because I am an orc." She said it flatly, as though it explained everything. "Your people and mine are enemies. We fought a war. You are a soldier, yes. I have seen the way you move, the scars on your body. You have killed orcs." "I was a soldier," Rowan acknowledged. "And yes, I killed orcs during the war. Just as orcs killed humans. It was war, and we did what we were ordered to do. But the war is over now. There is supposed to be peace." "Peace." The orc girl laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Peace means we stay on our side of the border and you stay on yours. Peace means we are forbidden from entering human lands on pain of death. Peace means my people call me a traitor and cast me out for showing you kindness." Rowan felt his chest tighten at her words. "They cast you out. Your own clan." She looked away, and he saw pain flash across her face. "I left. It is not quite the same thing, but the result is similar. I could not stay in the mountains any longer. The hatred, the constant preparation for the next fight, the refusal to consider that humans might be more than monsters. I was tired of it, so I left, and now I belong nowhere. I cannot return to my clan, and I certainly cannot live among humans. So I survive in the between places, in the forest and the wild lands, and I am alone." "How long have you been alone?" Rowan asked softly. "Since the summer." 4 months, perhaps 5. I have lost track of the days." She shifted her weight, still looking ready to bolt at any moment. "I found your farm by accident. I was looking for a place to shelter from a storm, and I saw your barn. I thought the farm was abandoned at first because you were away in the fields. I hid in your hayloft for 3 days before I realized someone lived here alone. A human man, working this land all by himself, with no family or clan to help him. And you decided to help me. Why?" The orc girl met his eyes again, and he saw vulnerability there that made his heart ache. "Because you reminded me of myself. Alone. Working so hard just to survive. I watched you from the barn, saw how you struggled with tasks that would be easier with 2 sets of hands. I saw your torn clothing, your exhaustion. And I thought perhaps I could do something to make your life a little less hard, just small things. Things you might not even notice." She paused, then added more quietly, "And it gave me a purpose. A reason to keep going when I felt like giving up entirely." Rowan found himself standing without consciously deciding to move. The orc girl tensed, but he held up his hands again in a peaceful gesture. "What is your name?" he asked. "Please, if I am going to thank you properly, I should know your name." She hesitated for a long moment, then answered. "Grushka. My name is Grushka. Grushka." He repeated it carefully, liking the sound. "I am Rowan Dalton, and I am more grateful than I can properly express for everything you have done for me. You have no idea how much it has meant, especially the kindness of it. I have been alone here for 3 years, and I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care whether I lived or died. Grushka's expression softened slightly, some of the fear leaving her eyes. You have been alone for 3 years. No family visits, no friends from the village. I left my family behind when I joined the army. They did not approve of my decision, and we parted badly. As for friends, I had them once, but most died in the war. The few who survived scattered to different places after the peace. The villagers here tolerate me because I buy supplies from them occasionally, but they do not trust me. I think I remind them too much of the war they want to forget. He smiled sadly. So yes, I have been alone, just me and the farm and the quiet, until you came. I should not have intruded on your privacy. No, Rowan said firmly. You should not apologize for showing kindness to someone who needed it. You gave me gifts, Grushka. Real gifts, offered freely with no expectation of reward. That is precious, and I am grateful for it. He paused, then took a chance. You said you have been sheltering in my barn. That is not safe, not with winter coming. It is too cold out there. You should stay in the house. Grushka shook her head immediately. I cannot. That would put you in terrible danger. If anyone learned you were harboring an orc, they would drive you off your land at best. At worst, they would hang you for treason against your own kind. I will not bring that down on you, not after you have been kind to me. No one comes here, Rowan argued. The nearest neighbor is miles away, and they have no reason to visit. The village is even farther, and I only go there once every few weeks for supplies. You could stay here safely, warm and dry with proper food and shelter. Please, Grushka, let me repay some of what you have given me. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the longing in her face warring with caution and fear. Why would you do this? She asked. Why would you risk so much for an orc you just met? Because you have already done so much for me. Because you are alone and hurting, and I know what that feels like. Because the war is over, and we are supposed to be finding ways to live in peace, and maybe that starts with small acts of kindness between individuals. He took a slow step closer, watching her carefully. And because I have been listening to the wind howl outside for an hour, thinking about winter storms, and the idea of you freezing in my barn makes me feel sick. Grushka blinked, and he saw her eyes grow bright with unshed tears. She looked away quickly, clearly uncomfortable with showing such emotion. I do not know what to say. Say you will stay, please. She stood silent for a long time, wrestling with the decision. Finally, she nodded once, a quick jerk of her head. For the winter only. When spring comes and the weather warms, I will leave and you will be safe again. I will stay in the barn during the day so that no one sees me if they happen to pass by, and I will only come into the house at night. That way, if someone does visit unexpectedly, you can honestly say there is no one here. It was not the complete acceptance Rowan had hoped for, but it was something. He smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Thank you. I will accept those terms if it makes you feel safer. But Grushka, I want you to know that you are welcome here, truly welcome. Not as an intruder or a secret, but as a guest, as a friend. She looked at him then with such surprise and tentative hope that he felt something shift inside him. Some wall he had built around his heart cracking just slightly. They stood there in the firelight, human and orc, two people who should have been enemies by law and custom. And for the first time in years, Rowan did not feel quite so alone. Over the following days, they developed a cautious routine. Grushka remained in the barn during daylight hours as she had promised, though Rowan made sure to bring her food and water regularly. He cleaned out one of the storage rooms in the barn and filled it with fresh hay and blankets, creating a warm nest where she could sleep comfortably. He was struck by how little she asked for, how she seemed surprised by each small kindness he offered. It made him wonder what her life had been like before, both in her clan and during these months alone in the wilderness. At night, after full dark, Grushka would come to the house. At first she was skittish, staying close to the door and ready to flee at the slightest unusual sound. But gradually, as the days passed and nothing terrible happened, she began to relax. She would sit by the fire while Rowan cooked their evening meal and they would talk. They spoke about small things at first, carefully avoiding topics that might bring up painful memories or difficult questions. She told him about the plants she had learned to identify in the forest, which ones were edible and which had medicinal properties. He told her about the challenges of farming, about the wheat harvest and the vegetable garden and his constant battle with groundhogs who wanted to eat everything he tried to grow. Slowly, as trust built between them, their conversations deepened. Rowan learned that Grushka had been trained as a craftswoman in her clan, learning sewing and weaving and other textile arts from her mother and aunts. She had been considered highly skilled among her people, her work valued and sought after. But she had also been questioning, unwilling to simply accept the hatred of humans that her clan elders preached. She had seen human prisoners during the war, had spoken to them when she brought water or tended their wounds, and she had found them to be people rather than monsters. Scared people, suffering people, but people nonetheless. Her clan had not appreciated her sympathy for the enemy, and tensions had grown until she finally chose to leave rather than continue living with constant censure and anger. "You regret leaving?" Rowan asked one night as they sat by the fire, the winter wind howling outside. Grushka considered the question carefully. "I regret that I could not make them understand. I regret that they chose hatred over curiosity, over the possibility of something better. But I do not regret leaving if the alternative was to slowly become like them, hard and bitter and closed off to anything new." She looked at him with those expressive amber eyes. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Rowan said quietly. "It makes perfect sense. I feel similarly about my own family, about the army, about a lot of things from my past. Sometimes leaving is the only way to hold on to who you really are." "Your family," Grushka said tentatively. "You said you parted badly. Do you want to tell me about it?" Rowan took a deep breath, surprised to find that he did want to tell her. He had not spoken about this to anyone in years, but something about Grushka made him feel safe enough to open old wounds. "My father is a merchant in the southern cities. Successful, wealthy, very concerned with reputation and social standing. He had my whole life mapped out for me. I would join his business, marry a girl from another merchant family to create useful alliances, produce heirs, take over the company when he retired. A neat, predictable, profitable life." "But you did not want that," Grushka said. "I hated it. The endless focus on money and status, the fake smiles and calculated friendships, the way everyone was always trying to use each other for advantage. I felt like I was suffocating. When the war started, I saw it as an escape. I joined the army against my father's wishes. He said I was throwing away my future, that I was being a foolish, idealistic child. We had a terrible fight and I left. I have not spoken to him since." "You miss them, your family?" "Sometimes. I miss my younger sister. She was 10 when I left and she is probably grown now, maybe married herself. I wonder what she is like, if she even remembers me. But my father, no, I do not miss him. He wanted me to be something I am not, and he could never accept that I needed to find my own path." Grushka nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. My mother wanted me to marry a warrior from our clan, a male who had distinguished himself in battle. He was strong and respected, but he was also cruel. He enjoyed hurting others, enjoyed the killing and the war. The thought of binding my life to his made me sick." When I refused, my mother said I was dishonoring our family, that I was being selfish and foolish. She said a female's duty was to strengthen the clan through good marriages, not to chase impossible dreams of kindness and peace. "I am glad you refused," Rowan said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. The thought of Grushka tied to some cruel warrior made anger flare in his chest. She smiled at him, and it transformed her face, making her look younger and lighter. "I am glad too. If I had married him, I would never have left. I would never have found your farm. I would never have met you." Their eyes held for a moment longer than was entirely casual, and Rowan felt something warm unfurl in his chest. He looked away first, suddenly flustered, and made a show of poking at the fire. "Well, I am glad you found me, even if you did give me quite a scare at first with all the mysterious mending." Grushka laughed, a bright sound that filled the small house. "I am sorry about that. I did not mean to frighten you. I just thought it would be easier for both of us if you did not know about me. Less complicated." "It would have been less complicated," Rowan agreed. "But I am glad for the complication. I am glad I know you are real, not just some helpful ghost." As the weeks passed, their evening conversations became the part of the day Rowan looked forward to most. He found himself rushing through his chores so he could return to the house and wait for Grushka to arrive after dark. They expanded beyond just talking. She taught him better ways to mend his own clothes, showing him stitches and techniques he had never known existed. He taught her how to cook some of the human dishes he knew, and she shared recipes from her clan that used different spices and preparations. They played simple games with stones and sticks, laughing when they made mistakes, celebrating small victories. One evening, Rowan brought his old fiddle down from the shelf where it had sat untouched for 2 years. He had played often as a young man, had entertained his fellow soldiers around campfires during the war. But after coming to the farm, he had found no joy in music, no desire to create beauty in his isolation. Now, with Grushka watching with curious interest, he felt the urge return. He tuned the instrument carefully and began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as his fingers remembered their old skills. Grushka listened with rapt attention, her eyes wide with wonder. "That is beautiful," she breathed when he finished the first song. "I've never heard anything like it. We have drums and flutes in my clan, but nothing with that sound." "Would you like to try?" Rowan offered, holding out the fiddle. She shook her head quickly. "I would break it. My hands are too strong, too clumsy for such a delicate thing." "Your hands sew stitches so fine I cannot see them," Rowan countered. "They are not clumsy at all. Please try it. I will show you how." Reluctantly, Grushka took the instrument. Rowan moved closer to show her how to hold it properly, where to place her fingers on the strings and how to draw the bow. He was acutely aware of her nearness, of the warmth radiating from her body, of the subtle scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to her skin. His heart beat faster as he guided her hand, showing her the motion. When she drew the bow across the strings and produced a clear note, she gasped with delight. "I did it?" "You did," Rowan said, his voice a bit rougher than he intended. "Try again." They spent the next hour with the fiddle, Grushka experimenting with different notes while Rowan coached her gently. She had no musical training, but she had a good ear and quick fingers. By the end of the evening, she could play a simple melody, and her face shone with pride and joy. Rowan felt something in his chest expand painfully at the sight of her happiness, at the knowledge that he had given her this gift of music and discovery. "Thank you," she said softly when she finally handed the instrument back. "That was wonderful. I never thought I would learn to make music." "You can practice whenever you like," Rowan said. "The fiddle is just sitting here otherwise. It should be played." "I would like that very much." They stood close together in the firelight, and Rowan found himself noticing things about Grushka that he had not quite let himself see before. The way the flames brought out golden highlights in her amber eyes, the graceful curve of her neck, the strength in her shoulders and arms, yes, but also the gentle way she moved, the careful precision of her hands. She was beautiful, he realized with a jolt that went through him like lightning. Not in spite of being an orc, but simply beautiful, full stop. And he was drawn to her in a way that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization terrified him. This was impossible, forbidden, dangerous on every level. He was human, she was an orc. Their peoples were barely at peace after years of brutal warfare. If anyone learned of his feelings, he would be ostracized at best and executed at worst. Grushka would face similar or worse consequences. There could be no future in such feelings, no happy ending to this story. He should push these thoughts away, bury them deep, pretend they did not exist. But when Grushka smiled at him, her tusks catching the firelight, her whole face alight with happiness, Rowan could not bring himself to regret what he felt. Even if it was foolish and impossible, even if it could only end in heartbreak, right now in this moment, it was real and it was good. That had to be enough. December brought heavy snows that turned the farm into a world of white silence. Rowan's outdoor work became limited to the essential tasks of caring for his animals and maintaining the buildings. He found himself spending more time in the barn, ostensibly to check on things but really to visit with Grushka during the daylight hours. She had made her storage room surprisingly comfortable, decorating it with small carvings and weavings she made from materials she found around the farm. He brought her books from his small collection, and she devoured them eagerly, reading by the light of a carefully shielded lantern. She had learned to read from a human prisoner during the war, she explained, a woman soldier who had traded lessons for better treatment. Grushka reads slowly but with great focus, and they spent many afternoons discussing the stories and ideas in the books. One day, a terrible blizzard rolled in with almost no warning. Rowan was in the barn when the wind suddenly picked up to a howling fury, and snow began to fall so thickly he could not see 3 feet in front of his face. He secured the animals quickly, making sure they had plenty of hay and water, then turned to head back to the house. Grushka grabbed his arm before he could leave. "You cannot go out in that," she said urgently. "You will get lost between here and the house and freeze to death." "It happens in storms like this, I have seen it. But the house can wait. You have plenty of firewood here, yes, and blankets. We will stay here until the storm passes. It is safer." She was right, though Rowan was reluctant to admit it. The wind screamed outside with a sound like a living thing in pain, and the cold bit with vicious intensity. They retreated to Grushka's room and barricaded themselves in, piling blankets around them for warmth, and building a tiny fire in a metal bucket that Grushka had ventilated through a gap in the wall. It was not much heat, but combined with their shared body warmth beneath the blankets, it was enough to keep the worst of the cold at bay. They huddled together as the storm raged outside, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Grushka sat close beside Rowan, and gradually, as the hours passed and the cold intensified, they pressed closer together until they were essentially embracing beneath the blankets. Rowan could feel the solid warmth of her body against his, could hear her steady breathing, and his heart raced with a confused mixture of feelings. He tried to tell himself this was purely practical, just survival, but he knew he was lying. He wanted to be close to her. He wanted to hold her. He wanted things he had no right to want. "Rowan," Grushka said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret letting me stay here? Do you ever wish you had turned me away that first night?" He pulled back just enough to look at her face, seeing uncertainty and fear in her eyes. "Never," he said firmly. "Not once, not even for a moment. Having you here has been the best thing that has happened to me in years. You have made this place feel like a home instead of just a place where I work and sleep. Why would you think I regret it? Because I have brought danger to your door. Because my presence here violates the law and puts you at risk. Because you are a good man who deserves peace, not complications." "You are not a complication," Rowan said. "You are a gift. You are someone who saw me struggling alone and offered help with no thought of reward. You are someone who makes me laugh, who challenges me to think differently, who has become dear to me." He hesitated, then decided to risk the truth. "Grushka, these past weeks with you have been the happiest I have been since before the war. I do not regret you, I treasure you." She stared at him, and he saw her eyes grow bright with tears that she blinked back. "You should not say such things to me." "Why not if they are true?" "Because they make me hope for things that cannot be. Because when spring comes, I will have to leave, and already it will be hard enough to go without making it harder. What if you did not have to leave?" The words came out before Rowan could stop them, and once they were spoken, he could not take them back. "What if you stayed? What if we found a way to make this work?" "There is no way," Grushka said, but her voice was anguished rather than certain. "We are too different. My people and yours are enemies. The law forbids it. Society forbids it. How could we possibly make it work?" "I do not know," Rowan admitted. "But I know I do not want you to leave. I know that thinking about spring, about you walking away and me never seeing you again, makes me feel like someone is tearing my heart out. I know that somewhere along the way, these past weeks, I have fallen in love with you." The words hung in the cold air between them. Grushka's eyes went wide, and she made a small sound of shock or distress. Rowan immediately regretted his confession, certain he had ruined everything, pushed too far too fast. He started to pull away to apologize, but Grushka's hands came up to grip his arms, holding him in place. "Do not take it back," she said urgently. "Do not apologize. I could not bear it if you apologized for saying that." "I am not sorry for feeling it," Rowan said carefully. "But I am sorry if I have made you uncomfortable, if I have crossed a line. You have not." Grushka's voice was fierce now. "You have not crossed any line because I feel the same way. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was foolish and impossible, but I cannot help it. I love you too, Rowan. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see me as a person rather than a monster. I love the sound of your voice and the way you laugh and the care you show to your animals. I love you, and it terrifies me because I know there is no future in it." "Then we will make a future," Rowan said, and he cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, at the warmth of her even in this terrible cold. "I do not care what the law says or what society thinks. We will find a way, together." "Rowan," he kissed her, cutting off whatever protest she was about to make. Her lips were soft and warm against his, and after a moment of surprise, she kissed him back with a hunger that matched his own. They clung to each other beneath the blankets as the storm raged outside, sharing warmth and breath and desperate promises. The world beyond their small shelter ceased to exist. There was only this moment, this connection, this love that should not be possible but was undeniably real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grushka rested her forehead against his. "This is madness," she whispered. "Yes," Rowan agreed, "but it is the best kind of madness." They held each other through the rest of the storm, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence. They spoke of dreams and fears, of hopes for a future that seemed impossible but which they both desperately wanted. Grushka told him more about her childhood in the mountains, about the beauties of the orc territories that humans never saw. Rowan told her about his sister, about his hope that perhaps someday he might reconnect with her, might build a new kind of family that was chosen rather than born into. They made no solid plans, had no clear path forward, but they had each other, and that felt like enough to start with. The storm finally broke near dawn, the wind dying down to occasional gusts and the snow tapering off. Rowan and Grushka emerged from their shelter to find the world transformed, buried under 3 feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the early light. The sky was a brilliant blue, clear and cold, and everything was perfectly still and beautiful. They stood in the barn doorway together, Rowan's arm around Grushka's shoulders, and looked out at this new world. "We should go to the house," Rowan said eventually. "Get properly warm, make breakfast." "People might see me in daylight," Grushka objected, though without much force. "There is no one for miles, and no one is traveling in this snow. It will be fine. Come." They trudged through the deep snow to the house, laughing when they sank to their knees, helping each other along. Inside, Rowan built up the fire to a roaring blaze while Grushka made tea. They cooked breakfast together, working in easy coordination, and ate sitting close together on the floor in front of the hearth. It felt domestic and right, like a glimpse of what life could be if they could somehow make this work. Over the following weeks, they stopped pretending. Grushka still kept to the barn during the day when she was doing work that might be visible from a distance, but she no longer treated the house as forbidden territory. She slept in the house most nights, in Rowan's bed, wrapped in his arms. They were careful, always aware of the need to keep their relationship secret, but within the boundaries of the farm, they allowed themselves to simply be together. Rowan had never been happier. The isolation that had felt like a burden before now felt like a blessing, giving them the privacy to build something precious without interference. They established rhythms and routines. Morning chores done separately, Rowan outside and visible while Grushka stayed hidden. Afternoon work done together in the barn or house, repairing tools and equipment, preserving food, working on projects. Evenings spent by the fire, talking or reading or making music. Nights tangled together under blankets, sharing warmth and love and whispered promises. But reality could not be held at bay forever. In mid-January, Rowan made his monthly trip to the village for supplies. He took the sled, pulled by his old horse through the snow-packed road, and tried to act normally despite the guilty joy that sang in his veins. He bought flour and salt, seeds for spring planting, a few other necessities. He was paying for his purchases when he overheard a conversation between 2 men at the general store. "I heard there's been orc signs spotted near the timber creek," one man said, his voice low and worried. "Tracks in the snow. The militia is organizing patrols, going to sweep the whole area and make sure we do not have raiders sneaking over the border." "About time," the other man replied. "We cannot be too careful. Peace treaty or not, orcs are savages. One whiff that we are letting our guard down, they will be raiding our farms and killing our families like in the old days. The patrols start next week. They are going to check every farm and homestead within 20 miles of the border. Make sure everyone is safe, make sure there is no orc activity." Rowan's blood turned to ice. Patrols, checking every farm, coming to his homestead. They would find Grushka, and there would be no way to explain her presence as anything other than what it was. She would be killed as an illegal border crosser, and he would likely be arrested for harboring her. Everything they had built together would be destroyed. He finished his purchases mechanically, barely hearing the shopkeeper's words, and drove home in a fog of panic and dread. He had to tell Grushka. They had to figure out what to do, how to keep her safe. Maybe she could hide in the deep woods until the patrols passed. Maybe he could claim ignorance if she was found, say he had no idea she was there. But even as he thought it, he knew those were weak plans with little chance of success. Grushka was waiting for him when he arrived home, coming out of the barn to help him unload the supplies. She took one look at his face and her smile faded. What happened? He told her, the words tumbling out in a rush. Grushka listened with growing horror, her face going pale beneath her green skin. When he finished, she stood silently for a long moment, her jaw clenched tight. "I have to leave," she said finally. "Now, today, before the patrols start. I will go deep into the wilderness where they will not find me. You will be safe." "No." Rowan grabbed her hands, holding tight. "We will figure something out. We will find a way. There is no way, Rowan. We knew this was temporary. We knew winter would end and I would have to go. This just makes it happen sooner." Her voice cracked on the words and tears streamed down her face. "I knew better than to let myself love you. I knew it would only make leaving hurt more, but I could not help it, and now I am paying the price." "We both are," Rowan said, his own voice thick with grief. "But Grushka, I cannot just let you walk away. You will die out there. It is the middle of winter. Even if you find shelter, there is no food, no way to survive until spring. I am Orc. I am strong. I will manage. You are one person alone in the wilderness in the worst part of winter. You are not invincible, no matter how strong you are. Please, there has to be another option." They argued through the afternoon and into the evening, desperation making them both sharp with each other. Grushka insisted she had to leave to protect him. Rowan insisted he would not let her sacrifice herself. They went in circles, finding no solution that satisfied either of them, knowing that time was running out. Finally, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, they sat together in silence by the fire. Rowan held Grushka close, feeling her tremble with suppressed sobs, and tried to think of something, anything that might save her. His mind kept turning over the problem, examining it from every angle, and suddenly an idea struck him. It was outrageous, probably impossible, but it was something. "What if we left together?" he said slowly. Grushka pulled back to look at him. "What? What if we left together, abandoned this farm and went somewhere else? Somewhere far from the border, far from people who know us. We could find a remote place, build a new homestead, live quietly. You could stay hidden most of the time, and I could interact with whatever neighbors we had. It would not be perfect, but it would be better than being separated. Better than you dying alone in the woods." "You cannot abandon your farm," Grushka protested. "This is your home, your livelihood. Everything you have worked for is here. Everything I care about is sitting right here in my arms," Rowan said fiercely. "The farm is just land and buildings. They can be replaced. You cannot be. Grushka, I do not want a life without you in it. If the only way to keep you is to leave everything else behind, then that is what I will do." "That is insane. You would be giving up everything for me. What if you come to resent me later? What if you regret it?" "I will not regret choosing love over property. I will not regret choosing life with you over lonely existence here." He cupped her face in his hands, making her meet his eyes. "Please, let me do this. Let us build something new together, somewhere we can both be safe." Grushka stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the war of hope and fear playing out in her expression. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Are you certain, truly certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." They made their plans quickly, knowing they had little time. The patrols would start next week, which gave them perhaps 5 days before militia members might arrive at the farm. Rowan would go back to the village the next day, sell his livestock and whatever supplies he could quickly liquidate, and claim he was abandoning the farm to return to his family in the south. The shopkeeper would spread that story, giving him cover for disappearing. Meanwhile, Grushka would pack what they could carry and prepare for hard travel. They would leave in 3 days, heading west into territories that were neither orc nor human lands, frontier regions where the law was thin and people asked fewer questions. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Rowan was burning his old life to the ground on the hope that he could build something better from the ashes. But when he looked at Grushka, saw the love and fierce determination in her eyes, he knew he was making the right choice. The next 2 days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Rowan made his trip to the village and successfully sold his animals for what he considered a fair price, given the quick sale. He spread his story about returning south, making it sound convincing by citing difficulties with the farm and loneliness. Several of the villagers seemed relieved rather than suspicious, happy to see the strange former soldier leaving their area. He used some of the money to buy supplies for travel, things that could be justified as necessary for his supposed journey south, and purchased a second horse, so both he and Grushka would be mounted. Back at the farm, he and Grushka packed what they could carry. Warm clothing, blankets, cooking supplies, tools they would need to build a new homestead. Grushka's sewing kit, precious and irreplaceable. Rowan's fiddle, wrapped carefully in cloth. Seeds for spring planting, carefully hoarded salt and other preservatives, weapons for hunting and protection. They left the furniture, the heavy equipment, everything that could not travel with them. Rowan felt a pang as he looked around the house that had been his home for 3 years. But it was a distant ache, nothing compared to the fierce joy he felt at the thought of facing the unknown with Grushka by his side. On the 3rd day, an hour before dawn, they mounted their horses and rode away from the farm. The snow had stopped, but the cold was bitter and their breath plumed white in the dark air. Rowan took one last look back at the buildings, silvered by starlight, and then turned his face forward and did not look back again. They traveled west for 2 weeks, following game trails and old trading paths that appeared only sporadically on the rough maps Rowan had purchased. The journey was brutal. The cold bit viciously, and they camped rough each night, huddling together under blankets and oilcloth for warmth. Food was scarce, game harder to find than Rowan had hoped, and they supplemented their supplies with what little they could forage. Several times they had to backtrack or detour around dangerous terrain. Once they saw what might have been a patrol in the distance and hid for hours in a rocky crevasse until the danger passed. But they were together, and that made even the hardship bearable. They talked as they rode, sharing stories and dreams. They laughed when things went wrong, finding humor in their misadventures. They held each other through cold nights, sharing body heat and whispered endearments. And gradually, as they left the border territories behind and moved into true wilderness, Rowan felt some of his fear ease. They were beyond the reach of the law here, beyond the rigid boundaries that said human and orc could not love each other. Here, they were just 2 people trying to survive and build a life together. Eventually, they found what they were looking for. A valley nestled between 2 ridges, sheltered from the worst of the wind, with a stream that ran even in winter, and a mix of forest and meadow that would be good for farming. There were signs that humans had lived here before, old foundation stones and the remnants of a garden plot, but those settlers were long gone. The place was abandoned, unclaimed, and beautiful in its isolation. What do you think? Rowan asked, sitting on his horse beside Grushka and looking down into the valley. I think it is perfect, Grushka said softly. I think we could build something good here. Then let us get started. They set up a temporary camp first, a simple shelter of poles and canvas near the old foundation stones. Then they began the hard work of preparing to survive and eventually thrive. Rowan cut timber for a cabin, working from dawn to dusk to fell trees and trim logs. Grushka cleared the old garden plot, pulling up years of weeds and brambles, and prepared the soil for spring planting. They hunted together, Grushka proving to be a deadly shot with a bow, and worked together to preserve the meat. They gathered deadwood for the fire, melted snow for water, and slowly accumulated supplies. As winter began to soften into early spring, the walls of their cabin rose. It was rough work, and the building would be small and simple, but it was theirs. They worked side by side, Grushka's superior strength making tasks easier that would have taken Rowan weeks alone. She could lift logs he could barely shift, could work for hours without tiring, but she never made him feel inadequate. Instead, she praised his skill with tools, his knowledge of construction techniques, his ability to plan and organize their efforts. "We make a good team," she said one evening as they sat outside the partially built cabin, eating a simple dinner of roasted rabbit and wild onions. "We do," Rowan agreed. He reached over and took her hand, twining their fingers together. "I do not regret leaving. I know I have said that before, but I want you to know I mean it. This is hard, but it is good. I am happier here with you than I ever was on that farm alone." "I am happy too," Grushka said. "Happier than I thought I could ever be. Sometimes I wake up and think I must be dreaming, that this cannot be real. A human man who loves me, who sees me as beautiful rather than monstrous, who left everything to build a life with me. It seems impossible." "It is real," Rowan assured her. "You are real, and this love is real, and we are going to make this work." "I believe you," Grushka said, and she leaned over to kiss him, soft and sweet. The cabin was finished in late March, just as the snow finally melted and the first green shoots began to appear in the garden plot. It was small, just one room with a sleeping loft and a hearth, but it was solid and warm and theirs. They moved their supplies inside, hung Grushka's weavings on the walls, and set Rowan's fiddle on a shelf they built together. That night, they slept in their own bed in their own house for the first time, and Rowan felt a sense of accomplishment and belonging that he had never experienced before. Spring turned to summer, and the valley bloomed around them. The garden flourished, producing more vegetables than they could eat. They built a small shed for storage, dug a root cellar to keep food cool, constructed a chicken coop, and purchased hens from a trading post 3 days' ride away. The trader had looked at them oddly, clearly recognizing Grushka as an orc, but the frontier had different rules than the settled territories. He said nothing, accepted Rowan's money, and went on his way. Rowan suspected the man would spread word that an unusual couple lived in the valley, but that was fine. Let people know. Let the world understand that human and orc could build something together. Other travelers occasionally passed through, frontiersmen and trappers, traders and prospectors. Most were surprised to see an orc living peacefully with a human, but the frontier attracted people who were themselves running from something or seeking freedom from society's rules. They were more accepting than townsfolk would have been. A few stopped to trade, exchanging news and goods. Word spread that the valley was occupied, claimed by Rowan Dalton and his orc woman, and most people respected that claim. One day in midsummer, a small group of orcs appeared at the edge of their property. Rowan saw them first and called out a warning to Grushka, who was working in the garden. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and then went very still. Rowan moved to stand beside her, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt, but Grushka shook her head. "Wait," she said softly. "I know them." The orcs approached cautiously, 3 figures in traveling leathers. As they drew closer, Rowan could see they were all female, roughly Grushka's age. They stopped a respectful distance away, and one of them called out in the orc language. Grushka responded, and a rapid conversation ensued. Rowan could not follow the words, but he could read body language. The visitors were surprised, curious, not hostile. Finally, Grushka turned to him. "These are friends from my old clan. We grew up together. They say more and more orcs are leaving the mountains, tired of the constant fighting and rigid rules. They heard rumors of a place where an orc lives peacefully with a human, and they came to see if it was true. They want to know if they can stay nearby, if there is room in this valley for others who seek peace." Rowan looked at the three orc women, saw the hope and exhaustion in their faces, and thought of Grushka alone in the wilderness, cast out and desperate. He thought of himself, isolated on his farm, slowly dying of loneliness. He thought of all the people, human and orc, who were trapped by old hatreds and rigid rules, who wanted something different but saw no path forward. "Yes," he said firmly, "there is room. Tell them they are welcome here if they can live in peace. Tell them we are building something new, a place where old enemies can become neighbors. Tell them they are welcome to be part of it." Grushka translated, and the relief on the visitors' faces was palpable. They bowed, a gesture of respect and gratitude, and began to set up camp at the far end of the valley. Over the following weeks, more came. Orcs who had left their clans, humans who were tired of endless prejudice and fear, even a few mixed groups who had found each other on the frontier. Not many, but enough. Enough to build a community. They established rules together, human and orc working side by side. No violence, no theft. Everyone contributes to the common good. Disputes are settled through discussion rather than combat. Respect for all, regardless of race or history. It was simple, almost naive, but it worked. The valley became a place of peace, a small experiment in a different way of living. Rowan and Grushka found themselves as informal leaders of this growing community, the couple whose love had sparked this whole venture. They helped new arrivals find places to settle, mediated occasional disputes, organized cooperative projects like building a communal storehouse and digging irrigation channels. It was exhausting work on top of maintaining their own homestead, but it was also deeply fulfilling. One evening in late summer, as they sat outside their cabin watching the sun set over the valley, Grushka leaned her head against Rowan's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "When you first saw me in your house that night, could you have imagined we would end up here?" "Never," Rowan admitted. "I thought I would live and die alone on that farm, just existing from one day to the next. I thought love was something that happened to other people, not to broken former soldiers like me. And I certainly never imagined I would fall in love with an orc woman and build a whole community around that love. Neither did I. I thought I would die alone in the forest, slowly starving or freezing, and that my clan would never even know what became of me. Instead, I have you. I have a home. I have friends and neighbors and a future." She paused, then added more quietly, "I have everything I never dared to dream about." "So do I," Rowan said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Grushka, I want to make this official. I know we cannot have a legal marriage, not with laws the way they are, but I want to make promises to you in front of our community. I want everyone to know that you are my partner, my love, my family. Will you marry me, in our own way, on our own terms?" Grushka's eyes went wide and tears spilled down her green cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you, Rowan. I will marry you in any way we can make it happen." They held each other as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Rowan felt complete in a way he had never experienced before. All the pain of his past, all the loneliness and loss, seemed like a path that had led him exactly where he needed to be. In Grushka's arms, in this valley, surrounded by people who had chosen peace over hatred, he had found his home. They held the wedding ceremony 3 weeks later, at the height of autumn when the valley blazed with color. There was no priest or official, but one of the older human settlers had been a magistrate once and agreed to speak the words. One of the orc women performed a traditional bonding ritual from her culture. They combined elements from both human and orc traditions, creating something new that belonged entirely to them. Grushka wore a dress she had sewn herself, using fabric purchased from a traveling merchant. It was simple but beautiful, dyed a deep blue that made her green skin luminous. She had woven wildflowers into her black hair, and she looked so lovely that Rowan felt his breath catch when he saw her. He wore his best shirt, the very first one she had mended for him all those months ago, and new trousers that she had made to replace his worn ones. They stood before the gathered community, perhaps 30 people in total, human and orc, and a few who were half-blood children from other mixed couples who had found their way to the valley. Rowan spoke his vows first, his voice clear and steady. Grushka, you came into my life as a mystery, mending what was broken without asking for anything in return. You showed me kindness when I had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. You gave me your trust when you had every reason to be afraid. You loved me despite every obstacle the world placed between us. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that love. I promise to stand beside you through every challenge, to protect you and cherish you, to build a future with you that honors both of our people. I promise to love you until my last breath, and to never regret the choice we made to be together. Grushka's voice trembled slightly when she spoke, but it was strong with conviction. Rowan, you saw me as a person when the world called me a monster. You offered me safety when I had nowhere to go. You gave me hope when I had given up on finding happiness. You left everything you knew to build something new with me, proving that love is stronger than fear or prejudice. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support you and challenge you and stand with you. I promise to honor your trust and to never take for granted the gift of your love. I promise to build a life with you that proves our peoples can live in peace. I promise to love you until the stars fall from the sky. They exchanged rings, simple bands that Rowan had hammered from copper and that Grushka had polished until they gleamed. When the magistrate pronounced them married, the community cheered. Human voices and orc voices rose together in celebration, and Rowan kissed his wife as the autumn sun shone down on them all. The feast that followed lasted well into the night. Everyone had contributed food, and tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and fresh vegetables, bread and cheese and preserves, ale and cider and sweet cakes. There was music, with Rowan playing his fiddle while others contributed drums and flutes and voices. Humans danced with orcs, prejudice forgotten in the simple joy of celebration. Children played together, too young to understand that they were supposed to be enemies. Old soldiers who had fought against each other in the war sat and talked, finding common ground in their shared desire for peace. As the stars came out and the fires burned bright, Rowan and Grushka slipped away from the celebration and walked back to their cabin. They stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at their community, their friends, the life they had built together. Then they went inside and closed the door, ready to begin their married life in the home they had made. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were hard winters and failed crops, injuries and illnesses, occasional visits from authorities who questioned the legality of their settlement. But they faced everything together, Rowan and Grushka and their growing community. More people came, and the valley expanded to accommodate them. They built a school where children of all races learned together. They constructed a meeting hall where disputes were settled and decisions made cooperatively. They established trade relationships with other frontier settlements, proving that humans and orcs could do business peacefully. Rowan and Grushka's cabin expanded too, gaining additional rooms as their family grew. Grushka bore 3 children over the years, half human and half orc, who inherited traits from both parents. They had Rowan's brown hair and Grushka's green skin, his human ears and her tusks, and they were beautiful in their uniqueness. Raising them in a community that accepted mixed families was a gift Rowan had not dared dream of during those lonely years on his first farm. Other mixed couples followed their example, and gradually the valley became known as a place where the old divisions did not matter. Travelers brought word that similar settlements were springing up elsewhere along the frontier, inspired by the example of Rowan and Grushka. Change came slowly to the settled territories, but here on the edges of civilization, people were proving that peace was possible. On a warm summer evening many years after their wedding, Rowan and Grushka sat on the porch of their expanded cabin and watched the sunset. Their children were grown now, building homes of their own in the valley or venturing out to spread the message of peace to new territories. The community had grown to over 100 people, a true village where human and orc lived side by side. Rowan's hair had gone gray, and lines marked his face, but Grushka's ageless orc blood kept her looking much as she had when they first met, though joy and good living had softened some of her hard edges. "You remember that first night?" Grushka asked, taking his hand. "When you caught me coming down from the ceiling, how could I forget?" Rowan said with a laugh. "I thought you were going to run away and I would never see you again. I almost did. I was terrified. So was I. Terrified of what I felt for you, of what it might mean, of all the ways it could go wrong. But it did not go wrong," Grushka said softly. "Against all odds, against every expectation, we made it work. We built something beautiful. We did." Rowan raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "And I would do it all again, every difficult moment, every sacrifice, every challenge, because it led me here to you, to this life. You were worth everything, Grushka. You still are." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set over their valley. Around them, their community went about its evening routines. Smoke rose from chimneys as dinners cooked. Children played in the fading light, their laughter ringing out regardless of whether they were human or orc or mixed blood. Neighbors called greetings to each other, and somewhere in the distance, someone was playing a fiddle, the melody carrying sweetly through the warm air. It had started with torn shirts mended in the night, with small acts of kindness offered without expectation of reward. It had grown into love against all odds, into a marriage that defied every rule society had set. And from that love, a whole community had bloomed, proving that the divisions between peoples were not as insurmountable as everyone claimed. It was just one small valley, just one group of people choosing peace over hatred, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, Rowan had learned, were powerful things. He thought back to that cold autumn morning when he had first discovered a mended shirt, when his isolated existence had begun to change. He had been broken then, barely surviving, going through the motions of life without really living. Grushka had fixed more than his clothes. She had mended his heart, his spirit, his hope for the future. And in return, he had given her a place to belong, a love that saw her true worth, a partnership that honored everything she was. They had been 2 lonely souls, lost in the wilderness between their warring peoples. They had found each other against impossible odds, had chosen love when fear would have been easier, had built a life together when the world said it could not be done. Their story was not a grand epic of heroes and battles, but something quieter and perhaps more profound. It was a story of daily kindness, of persistent hope, of love that refused to be defeated by prejudice or law or circumstance. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, Rowan held his wife close and felt profound gratitude for the mystery that had entered his life so many years ago. That mysterious person in the night, mending what was torn, caring when there was no reason to care, seeing him when he felt invisible to the world. She had changed everything, and he had let himself be changed, and together they had changed the world around them, one small act of love at a time. The torn shirts were long gone, worn to rags and replaced many times over. But the love that had begun with those simple acts of mending remained strong, a foundation upon which everything else in Rowan's life was built. It would endure until his last breath and beyond, a testament to the power of seeing another person truly, of offering kindness without condition, of believing that love could bridge even the widest divides. In the valley below, lights began to appear in windows as families settled in for the night. The community that Rowan and Grushka had founded would continue long after they were gone, a living legacy of what they had proven possible. Humans and orcs, once bitter enemies, now lived together in peace. Children grew up knowing that the color of someone's skin or the shape of their ears did not determine their worth. Young couples, mixed and otherwise, married with the full blessing of their community. The hatred that had driven the war was not forgotten, but it was no longer the defining force in these people's lives. And it had all begun with an orc girl working at night, mending shirts for a lonely farmer who needed to know that someone cared. Such a small thing, really, but love often started small. It was in the nurturing, the choosing each other again and again through difficult times, that it grew into something strong enough to weather any storm. Rowan and Grushka rose from their porch and went inside their home, closing the door behind them on another peaceful day in the valley they had built together. They had found their happy ending, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of thousands of small moments of love and choice and commitment. They had earned their happiness through courage and perseverance, and they would treasure it for all the days they had left. In the morning, there would be work to do, challenges to face, and a community to serve. But tonight, there was just the two of them in the home they had made, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well tended. Rowan held Grushka close as they prepared for bed, marveling as he did every day that this extraordinary woman was his, that she had chosen him just as surely as he had chosen her. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Always." And in the valley where torn people had come to be mended, where enemies had become neighbors, where love had proven stronger than hatred, Rowan and Grushka settled into sleep wrapped in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that they had found exactly what they had always needed: each other. Home, peace, love. The simple, extraordinary, impossible happiness of two hearts that had refused to accept that they could not be together, and had bent the world to accommodate their love instead. Their story was complete, their happy ending secured not through magic or destiny, but through the simple, radical act of choosing love every single day. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.